Today on Locked On Red Wings, Max Bultman of The Athletic joins us as we look at what's changed with the Red Wings under Todd McLellan and look ahead at the approach the Red Wings may take with the deadline.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a sports writer for C&G newspapers, while I am a color commentator for Oakland University ACHA D1 men's hockey. And today, we're happy to be rejoined by Max Bultman, Detroit Red Wings beat writer of The Athletic, as we do, maybe not mid-season, two-thirds season check-in on the Detroit Red Wings. Good time to be doing it with the trade deadline a little over a week away. Max, how's it going? And of course, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Your guys' intro music gets me so hype every time it plays. I forget every time I come on, and then it starts going. I'm like, all right, let's podcast. Let's go.
For a while, I thought Scotty's Locked On Tigers had the best background intro music of all of the Locked On network. Do you still have that music?
Yeah. It's sick, dude. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, it's pretty sweet. I had nothing to do with the creation of it either. It's pretty sweet. Yeah.
So Max, we're gonna pepper you with questions as per usual about your thoughts on the Red Wings right now and going forward. And I mean, without further ado, I have a lot on my plate, our plate, that I want to get to in this episode. So why don't I just lead us off? I do want to just ask, right? Under Derek Lalonde, the Red Wings were 13, 17, and 4 in 34 games played. Under Todd McLellan, they're 17, 5, and 2 in 24 games. 4 more wins already under Todd McLellan in 10 fewer games.
Wild.
That is incredible. But with the same roster, in your eyes, what has Todd McLellan brought that has so drastically changed this team?
It's been pretty remarkable. I mean, even if you go back to my coverage in the days leading up to Lalonde's firing, and even in the days after, one of the themes I felt like I was hitting over and over was, a coaching change should give him a fresh start, a little bit of new energy, but at the end of the day, it's the same roster. Temper your expectations for how much is really going to change. And what an idiot I am, because a lot has changed, and it's at this point now, Brian. I mean, we're 20, what did you say, 24 games into this?
24 games, yeah.
I have a hard time saying this is new coach bump anymore, which I felt like the first, 10 to 12 games, that's usually how long you see teams after a coaching change have that surge, and then stuff starts to find its level. Well, if this is them finding their level, then that level's actually a lot more than I was giving them credit for. Why do I think it's happened? I think a big part of it is new energy, a fresh start. I think, you heard on the very first day of practice, the line that gained so much traction, play effing hockey. That's a simplification, obviously. That's not the extent of the coaching he's done, but I do think it's kind of emblematic of what he's asked them to do. He simplified a little bit, asked them to play a little more instinctively. I think given some confidence to certain guys to embrace their roles and maybe even move them into higher roles and to show that they believe in them. And some of those things I think have been really successful. I look at some of the ways that it was going up until Christmas that I frankly agreed with. I would have said, you can't break up Edvinsson and Seider. Look how good they are together. They're the best defense pair you have going. How could you break them up? Well, they break them up. And yeah, I don't think either of those two defense pairs is as good as the Seider and Edvinsson pair was. But I think you've gotten more out of Ben Sherratt than you were getting before. You've certainly gotten way more out of Albert Johansson than you were getting before. I would have said, hey, Marco Kasper, he's been a pretty good second line center for you. That's a good sign. That's good development. Keep him there. That's where you see him long term. Todd McLellan comes up. No, we're putting him on the top line wing next to Larkin and Raymond. And oh, by the way, he's going to have 16 points in the next 18 games or whatever. I mean, he did that 5 or 6 games in. These are things that, I would not have faulted, and still frankly do not fault Derek Lalonde for not doing what he was doing with those players was working. But I think with fresh eyes on the situation, McLellan came in, made those changes. It's not like, Lalonde had never split up Seider and Edvinsson before. It's just worked better. And I don't think that the tweaks that they've made to the system and the scheme are vast. I really don't. I think they're simplifying a little things, tweaking little things. It's just been, I think, a new energy, a new presence, and some new deployments, and it's worked out really, really well. Better than I think anyone, including I bet the Red Wings, could have imagined.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. That's something we reiterated a lot on here too, was like, the issues with the roster don't just go away with a new coach, and yet they like kind of have, like, not entirely, but like, a lot of those issues we were all pointing out early in the season have clearly not been as big of factors at this point. And that kind of leads me to our next question, which is, you mentioned there the new coach bump is kind of, that time has passed. Like, we're not really, it's been enough games under the belt now where it's like, I'm not really sure it's just that anymore. So the big question is this just the new team? Like, is this I guess you would call it like a sustainable product? Is this something that the rest of the season that we are, I mean, like, no one knows, obviously. Again, we all kind of predicted them to come back down to earth, and like, here we are. But like, from where you're sitting, is the stylistic and deployment changes and the things that have been adjusted, are they things that can keep the Wings kind of above water going forward?
It's a complicated question. 17-5-2
Right.
level team? No, I don't think so. I think that's still a lot to ask. They've had 2 7-game win streaks already under McClellan. I think 7 games is like either the second or the third longest win streak in the league this season, and they've got 2 of them under McClellan. That's very hard to do, a third or a fourth time, which is probably what it would take to keep repeating that record. But there's certainly, this is much more like the team I think you thought you would see at the start of the, well, maybe not even the start of the year, because I think I was pretty lukewarm on them at the beginning of the year too. I thought they would finish right around 88 points, I think was my prediction for them. Now I think they're going to finish with like 91, 92 points. That should be right there on the playoff bubble, but it's possible they could be like a 94, 95 point team. They just have to win the right games. And 2 of those games are huge ones coming up this week, the Thursday game against Columbus and then the Saturday game in the Horseshoe at Columbus. If they can win those 2 games, they're all of a sudden in a really good spot math-wise for the playoffs. But they have this brutal schedule, the hardest remaining schedule in the NHL. I'm sure people are sick of hearing it. It's true that Columbus and the Rangers also have very hard schedules. So that's obviously a good thing for the Red Wings, is that it's not like their teams they're competing with have cakewalks here, but they have a lot on the road. And I think that's the biggest thing that stands out, is that's going to define whether or not this team makes the playoffs, whether or not we look back and say, yeah, that was all real. It's going to come down to whether they can win on the road. Can you go win in Vegas, in Colorado, in Carolina, in Florida, in Tampa? These are all places that we've seen the Red Wings struggle at times in past years, for good reason. Those are some of the best franchises and teams in the league. That's going to ultimately be their path to the playoffs, is can you go pick up a couple wins or at least a couple points in some of those brutally hard games and continue to take care of business the way they have under McClellan at home.
Yeah, and I think that beating a team like Minnesota that was on rest on the road, and granted they are beat up, but so are the Red Wings, is kind of a reassuring sign, because as it stands right now, they're the 6th best team in the league, at least in the standings. Obviously, they're not quite the Florida Panthers tier, defending Stanley Cup champions, but you're seeing a team that even when they're not playing their best hockey and they're tired, they're not giving up. But there's still some things that are left to be desired with this team, Max. And I think you would agree that, some of the things that are going to need to happen to make this a more sustainable team is, the first and foremost, right, is the penalty kill. You cannot continue to allow a goal every single game when you're on the penalty kill. It helps when you score 3 of your own on the power play. But I feel like when it comes to sustainability, one of the big things going forward is to continue to improve. And it has improved, but continue to take strides forward and maybe get out of dead last in the league in that regard. That would be helpful.
That certainly would be the hope, right? We'll see. As the year has gone on, it's starting to seem like they've tried just about everything. And they're not going to lead the league in the PK the rest of the way. That's pretty clear. They're not going to probably be a top half of the league PK the rest of the year, but can you get closer to average, especially with as good as their power plays? If you just have an average penalty kill, I think you're in really good shape, because the power play is deadly, right? The other thing I'm kind of watching is, this was the case in the Minnesota game Tuesday night. Can you get more offensive contributions beyond your big guys? Because as much as we talk about it's the same roster, one of the things that has happened since McClellan took over around Christmas, their stars have been even better than they were. And that was something like, if you look at them before Christmas, one of the criticisms you could have made is it's a really top heavy team. They're driven disproportionately by Larkin, by Raymond, by Seider, by Edvinsson, by DeBrincat, even by Kane a little bit, although Kane had a tough first half. That's still pretty true, I would say. It's just that they've gotten better fits to surround those guys and maybe spread out the impact. Andrew Kopp next to Alex DeBrincat played, I thought, his best hockey as a Red Wing over the last 2 months. And obviously that makes it all the more brutal that he goes down for the year now, because I think he was a great fit there. He was a great fit getting to the middle of the ice, digging out pucks, having the defensive conscience to kind of free up to Brinkett, who I think is having a fantastic year this year, and probably silencing some people who were maybe a little more tepid on that acquisition after the first season. He looks like he's going to be a 35-ish goal scorer this year, which is fantastic. That's everything you would have wanted when they acquired him. So I think you want to see what you saw Tuesday night. Edvinsson chip in with some goals. Got to get more out of Tarasenko, right? And that was big to see. It's only the second time this year that they've won a game that he scored in. So that's got to be a good thing, right?
Yeah, he scored two against San Jose, right? And they lost that game.
Yes, and then getting those contributions from Casper, Soderblom starting to come on. These are big things that I think if those things are happening, I like their odds to get into the playoffs.
I 100% agree, and that kind of leads us perfectly into talking about who you think your biggest surprise player is on the roster. I want to get to that on the other side of this break. Stay tuned to Locked On Red Wings.
Whoa, it's me.
We don't want you, Scotty. As the trade deadline approaches, why not trade coffee? If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade. And let me tell you, the coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing you fresh coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Their experts have taste-tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. The subscription makes it so easy. No more last-minute grocery store runs or settling for whatever you have on the shelf. And if you don't love your first bag, no worries. Trade will replace it for free until they get it right. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/LockedOnNHL for 40% off your first order. drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. I got to give Max credit. That little one-liner at the beginning as the trade deadline approaches, that was Max before, just off the cuff before we started recording, came up with that. Banger of an opener for a read. Credit Max Bultman of The Athletic, who is our guest on today's episode. And going into the break, Scotty, we were talking about this Red Wings team and the incredible turnaround they've had, what still needs to be improved upon. I want to ask Max, who on the Red Wings roster right now is your biggest surprise? Somebody you didn't expect to get as much out of that they are getting?
There's a lot of candidates. I mean, you could go to Marco Casper and the level that he's produced at. I think once we saw his training camp, I think this looked possible that he would play a big role. I think one of my bold predictions for this year was actually that he would finish out the year in the Red Wings top 6, which obviously looks very likely that he's going to. So I can't say I'm surprised about that. I'm not shocked by Albert Johansson, although a little surprised at how big a role he's carved out. I would have said, he's probably your 6th defenseman by the end of the year. Right now, he's kind of a number 4 for you, which is great. I'm going to go with Elmer Soderblom, a guy that I did not know if we were going to see in Detroit this year. I went to Grand Rapids about a month ago now to do a check-in story on some prospects. I'm thinking this story is going to be full of Nate Danielson. It's going to be full of Shai Buium. Mazur and Lombardi were hurt at that time, so I knew it probably wasn't going to be that. Maybe a little Sebastian Cossa. Well, the big standout, all the buzz when I was there, was about Elmer Soderblom. And the reason was because he had started to use the 6'8", which sounds so simple, right? It sounds like you could get a guy to do that in a week, right? But it has taken some time for him to really embrace the physical dimension that his size gives him. For so long, the story on him has been this big guy with great hands, and that's great. But if you don't use the big body, then you're really not that different from any other player with good hands, which there's a lot of. Where he's come through is he has forechecked, he has used his size, he protects the puck. You saw him set up the goal, the game-winning goal, I believe it was, the Edvinsson one, where he takes it through the zone, circles, finds Johansson finds Edvinsson. If Elmer Soderblom is going to be making plays like that and is going to be finishing hits on the forecheck, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of him. And it's been really impressive. I think he's got 6 points in his last 9 games. Like, this is a guy who's come up, taken advantage of the opportunity. I don't know if they called him up when they called him up. I don't know if they expected that he was going to be here for, 10 games, 12 games, the rest of the season. Right now, he's looking like a player who has a case to stay up. And I think that's really impressive and really significant for the Red Wings.
We made an argument, when we were doing our mid-season Four Nations break grades that, potentially nobody in the entire organization has exceeded their expectations more than Soderblom. If you're going based on like preseason or end of summer expectations, the storyline there is incredible. And when you mention all of the prospects, and how much media attention obviously they've been getting over the years in Grand Rapids and whatnot, I think everyone's eyes now with this time in the calendar year turn to who is potentially on the chopping block. Where do the Wings stand going into the trade coffee deadline? I think that it is a fascinating conversation that only gets, depending on, I guess, where you sit, clearer after the Kopp injury. I want to know your thoughts on the deadline and kind of where you see the Wings fitting in this year.
It's such a fascinating question because they were in basically an identical position a year ago in the standings, and they basically did nothing. They traded away Klim Kostin, freed up some flexibility going into the summer. Hey, I thought that was a fine move. It worked out reasonably well. They needed the cap space. Obviously, they were shedding way more money come the summer.
Right.
Could we see him behave similarly this year? I think that's totally possible. If you could move on from a contract, maybe that's like a Tarasenko or something that hasn't worked great and you could free up some money. Hey, that's possible. But I think people's attention is getting into, hey, like this playoff drought's been 8 years. Is it time to buy a little bit? And while their behavior last year tells me don't be so sure, it's at least possible. There's a case for it, right? And I think that the biggest area that I think makes sense is on D. They're not as deep on the blue line this year as they were a year ago, especially after, they traded Oli Mata early this season, and then Jeff Petrie goes down. Well, now all of a sudden, yeah, you could stand to add. It's a little bit thin there. Lagesson has played NHL games before. Obviously, you could go to him, but I think if you fancy yourself a playoff team, maybe a defense addition makes sense. And now with this Kopp injury, people are going to want to know, is there an upgrade coming there? Personally, I look at it and I say JT Compher slots in really naturally. He was playing on the fourth line. That was too low in the lineup for JT Compher. He slots up in the second line. Again, you can debate, is he the perfect second line center? I don't know, but he's been a second line center on a playoff team in Colorado. He can do that job, right? And I think he has a similar profile to Kopp. He can complement DeBrincat and Kane, I think, in similar ways, although he's had that look before and maybe it's had kind of mixed results. I think he's the 2C. So the question is, do you want to go forward with Michael Rasmussen as he gets healthy as your 3C, or do you want to bump him at some point back to the wing where he's looked pretty good over the last couple of years? He's been a good player on the wing for you. I don't know the answer to how they want to do it, but I would say if you want to bump him back to the wing, consider somebody else is getting bumped out of the lineup at that point, and at times they've already been scratching sometimes both Mott and Fisher, at a minimum Mott or Fisher. You're already doing that, and at some point, if you're keeping Soderblom up, the numbers start to get, okay, what do you want to do? So to me, if you're going to make an addition, it's got to be either a clear upgrade or give you something you don't have. And to me, that what you don't have is probably a physical element. So to me, if I'm looking at it, the guy I would be the most interested to see them acquire is Trent Frederick from the Bruins. I think there's a physical element there that they lack that he could bring. He has scored. He had 17 and 18 goals the past couple of years. It's just been a quiet offensive season. Something like that. A defenseman. Those are the things that I think make the most sense, unless you can get a real, long-term young center or something. That's when I think you can have the center conversation. I don't think you need to bring in a rental center just to plug a hole.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we should at least address because a lot of people on social media are really excited about it. Obviously, the trade away of Ville Husso, I think, freed up, $3 million because $1 million was already buried.
3.6,
and then 3.6, thank you. And so they have like $14 million in cap they can spend at the deadline, and then if need be, they can exceed it even more with Andrew Kopp. So a lot of people are getting stars in their eyes, right, about the possibility of making a huge acquisition. I'm with you where I'm not making a huge acquisition for a rental with the state of this team is right now. Like, you're not in a cup window yet. So why burn good prospects and players? But it's that acquisition of a young player with term that is attractive. And the name that has been circulating a lot with the Red Wings all season is Dylan Cousins. And I just want to know your thoughts on Dylan Cousins as, that possible young guy with, struggling to produce the last couple of years with Buffalo, but has clear upside as a potential target for the Detroit Red Wings.
Well, Dylan Cousins, the player I like, right? He is a lot of appealing elements. He's a young, good skating, big-bodied center who I think can play a good two-way game. He's shown you he can score 30 goals. He's shown you he can put up 60-plus points, but he hasn't done it in the last 2 years, and he's now locked in at a $7+ million AAV. And that's where it gets complicated. Now, you can take that bet. The cap's going up. It's not the end of the world if you miss on that. But if he is just a 40-point center, all of a sudden, you don't want to be paying him $7 million, ideally. Now, I think there's more in his game. And, you can count on – you can't count on only one hand the number of times a player has left Buffalo and gone on to more success. Unfortunately for the Sabres, I don't mean to grave dance there. I really do feel for that fan base. It has happened before, is my point. Like, sometimes guys need a fresh start, and that organization has had a few of them. It's had to see this play out in the past, right? So I think there's a case for it. The problem is, how do you make a trade with Buffalo work? Because Buffalo, just like you, as much as they are lower in the standings and they are in this lottery position now, I don't think they're really interested in taking picks back that aren't going to play for them for 2 or 3 years. I think they're a team that needs to have now players. And if you're in the Red Wings shoes, like, who can you give them, right? A lot of your guys have no trade clauses anyway, even if you were to find a player on your roster that they wanted back, so that makes it tricky. So I think the fit for Cousins, yes, I think it makes sense. I think he's a good player. He's a bet worth taking, albeit still a risky bet in a couple ways. But I just have a hard time seeing what can these two teams work out. They're not really natural trade partners in that way. And that's before you even get to the division rival factor.
Absolutely. Scotty, let's head to another quick break. When we return, we'll wrap up our conversation with Max Bultman of The Athletic. Stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on fourth quarter comebacks, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. You're going to love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, you never feel like you're going to miss a chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Scotty, I believe you're probably up next for questions for Max. What do you got for him?
Did you say probably because
I don't keep track?
Oh, okay. I thought it was like I talk a lot, so it's probably you.
I mean, that also is very true.
Fair,
yeah.
No, it's fair. I think I think we've touched on it a few times. We've kind of been dancing around talking about and breaking down the Copp injury. Alex Cobb of the Tigers also hurt.
Both accurate.
And just kind of talking about what the center position looks like on this team going forward. Obviously, I think we're all under the assumption that Comfer kind of just slides in naturally as the 2C, but how you mix and manage the bottom 6 is really kind of fascinating. Last game, we saw Mott play center. We saw Joe Veleno slide back into a 3C role, which I think we can all agree, like on a consistent, fully healthy level, is not something we probably want to see him that high in the lineup. Just kind of talk about what you're expecting. If you think that the lineup we saw last game is one we're going to see more often, and kind of what center is even going to look like going forward.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a puzzle. I mean, I think the core question is, do you want Michael Rasmussen at center or do you want him on the wing?
Sure.
And if you want him at center, I think that's the easy answer. Then he's your 3C. You're going to play him with Soderblom, and whether that's Tarasenko, whether that's Berggren, whether that's somebody else. I think that makes sense as a third line. If you want him on the wing, then you have to make some other decisions. And I don't think they want to move Casper off of where he is on the top line right now, even though long term I do still see him as a center, and I think they do. Veleno, I think, can do it. I wouldn't be so quick to write it off, especially with the right insulation. But I do think if you want Rasmussen on the wing, that's where you can have the conversation about, is there a rental center out there? Someone in the comments of my story today, I wrote a little bit about this, suggested a guy who I hadn't really considered, but Christian Dvorak. That seems like the kind of like low cost guy. Another person DM'd me asking about Pius Suter. I could see that. I don't know that it's a huge upgrade, right? Yeah, that's right. It's not a huge upgrade, I don't think, but it could be a solution if you feel like you want Rasmussen on the wing. But I just think the easiest thing is just keep Rasmussen there at center. He's done it. He can give you good minutes there. He has the skill set for it. And obviously with Soderblom on the wing, you got a pretty big line there. You can kind of complement them however you want. You can get another big body in there with them and have that size factor, and have Rasmussen and someone else kind of check and Soderblom freed up a little bit. Or you can have a smaller body with them and let those two guys be around the net and somebody else facilitate outside. I think that's the best solution, the easiest solution. So to me, that tells me that's the most likely solution. But they may have different priorities. They may want to bring in a replacement and move him to the wing. So I guess that's the first question that underpins all of it.
Christian Dvorak, by the way, is only 29 years old. He's one of those players I thought was like,
he seems
34.
40, doesn't he?
Yeah. I was like, I wonder how old he is. He's only 29. He's my age. So over the hill and definitely coming out of his prime.
Yeah. So.
I want to turn our eyes to goaltending real quick, because I think throughout this season, goaltending has been, I think, more, at least personally for me, more of a strength than I expected. League average goaltending save percentage right now is like, what, 901, 902. Both Talbot and Lyon are floating between 905 and 908, depending on the game. But lately have been a little bit more leaky in the more recent games coming out of the break. I want to get your opinion on the goaltending situation, if an upgrade there ahead of the deadline is something that you would consider, or if you think that this tandem is doing a fine enough job to get them into the playoffs.
I think I'd leave it alone. Now, I know, at any given time with goaltending, you're subject to pretty big swings in either direction. But I think Talbot's been a steady force for them. I think Lyon has been really good. And now that they've kind of got his workload managed, that they don't have to over rely on him, I think they can benefit from that tandem. I think it's a perfectly fine tandem. Is it going to be the favored goaltending setup in any playoff series they're in? Probably not. If you look at their potential matchups, are they going to be the better goaltending tandem against what Florida could bring, against what Washington could bring? Probably not even against necessarily what Toronto could bring, as I think those guys in Toronto, Wall and Stolars, have answered some questions this year. No, they're probably not going to be the favored goaltending tandem. But I don't know that anyone you'd go get on the market would make you the favored goaltending tandem. Mm-hmm. And I think right now they have this flexibility where it's going to suit them well with Kosa continuing to perform well. And I think you're hoping that next year Kosa's on the roster in some capacity. And I don't, if you go get somebody with term, what does that do to that outlook? Talbot obviously has another year left. It's not like they can't do it. I would understand if they feel like they need an upgrade. Obviously this offseason, I felt like, that was an area they needed to do something, and they came back with Talbot, which I think is okay. It's not Linus Ullmark, which Ottawa has, right? It's not Igor Shesterkin, the guy that they're going to be battling with to get into the playoffs. But for what's out there, if you don't want to spend a first-round pick to trade for Ullmark, which they didn't, and I think that's a fine decision, then I think Talbot and Lyon's okay. It's not going to be like I said, they're not going to have the matchup edge in net in any playoff series, but I don't think it's a massive Achilles heel necessarily either.
Yeah. And now that Husso's gone, I mean, this might almost be like a no-duh statement, but like if one of those two goes down, it's just Kosa, right? Like, is there anyone else?
Could be Jack Campbell.
Okay, yeah, I guess, yeah. That I don't know, that the whole situation's fascinating just because obviously like the Husso trade frees up cash. Brian, you talked about it earlier, but one of the best, coolest, whatever word you want to use, side effects of that is just like even more playing time for Kosa down there.
Yeah. And ultimately, when you look at the big picture, I still think goaltending's a big picture need for the Red Wings, right? Like you
Sure.
need Kosa or someone else, Kosa, Augustine, or
Yeah.
someone from the outside to establish themselves as like, this is our guy in net. But I just look at what's out there on the market. And, I guess I saw that there's like a Binnington thing out there on Twitter today.
I did see that too.
I don't know if there's anything to that or not. Like, I can't add any reporting to that or anything. Like, I suppose if you're talking about a guy who's a little more proven, like maybe, but like, do you want that kind of term, and what's that going to cost? And, it just seems a little bit of a reach for me. Right. But I do think they need someone to establish themselves as their rock, right? Because you want to eventually, when you're in the playoffs, you want to have a chance at having that edge in a matchup in goal. But for what's out there, does anyone move the needle? Not to me. So long-term goaltending, yes, still a need. At this deadline, I'd be surprised, but hey, I could be wrong.
Max, thank you so much for joining. I had no clear, easy segue for that, so we're just going to go right into that. Scott, do you have any final thoughts or questions for Max?
No, man. Appreciate you as always for coming on.
All right. And
My pleasure,
go read
guys.
Max's stuff over at The Athletic. He just had a really good article. You want to hear more about his trade deadline thoughts? Go check out his article at The Athletic. Max, again, thank you so much. Scotty and I will be back with a game recap of the first of two very important games against the Columbus Blue Jackets tomorrow night. So stay tuned for that. I guess it would be tonight by the time you're listening. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.